So I want to talk about some creative jobs that PhDs often get. One of the problems that I see is that people get very narrow in terms of what they think that we should actually do. But there's many jobs that you can get into that are really interesting that I think are going to be very, very beneficial for you if you're to think of these. So I'm going to jump into them, and then at the end, what I'm going to do is talk about why this actually might happen, that we might overlook these particular things because it's easy to overlook them. All right, so one of the things that's is really important is going into uh, like intelligence agencies and in doing those things where you're actually doing spy stuff, right? That is actually really important. You do need a skill set that is very rigorous and at the top of the game because all of that stuff is constantly changing from cybersecurity to espionage. All of that stuff is changing, so you often need a very high degree of understanding of what knowledge actually is. An important thing, another important field to get into is gaming. And believe it or not, there is a lot of gaming science that goes on that you can actually get a PhD in terms of understanding this thing, this stuff. So Duolingo, for example, there's a lot of science that goes into understanding how that actually works and what that might look like in terms of allowing us to do things. There's a lot of research to go into how we actually learn about things that's very, very challenging, and it's not clear up front how learning actually works. A huge part of what economics is thinking about how do we understand that we know that there's some causal understanding of what something is happening in this world. Now, an important field that everybody knows that PhDs are really gravitating towards now, particularly because of their analytical skills, is all of the tech companies. There is a push now in industry towards people going into the tech industry if they get their PhD, not only in business, that's my field, strategy and innovation. There's some people that it was really kind of unusual, but there's more and more people that I'm starting to see go into those particular fields where they're working with and for tech companies. So it's not just us sort of watching them, but also understanding, giving an insider view in terms of how tech companies actually work. Another really important field that a lot of people go into is if you were to look at disaster fields, there's a lot of people that have a strong understanding of accidents, right? So that's actually a field that I study is failure disasters, industrial disasters. That's something that I'm interested in. And there is a lot of ideas that come out of there. There's one, it's called this guy Reason, James Reason, came up with the Swiss cheese model. There's this idea that at hospitals, for example, you have multiple layers of safety procedures to prevent problems from happening. So you want to think about how these layers actually work. There's a lot of PhDs that go into biological fields and things from, I know in the city that I'm in, there's people that actually go and work in nature, where they go and they work with the conservation officers and they study how many snakes there are in a certain population, for example. And they're really getting into these different fields that actually add to conservation. How a friend of mine um, looks at in modeling fire and forest fires, how that might actually spread, and they look to see it how that might actually spread across um, a topographical area. You imagine it's actually really hard to model this mathematically, and so there is a lot of simulation and computer work that needs to be done in terms of understanding that. Climate science is another important area where people often go into, where they need at high level, particularly a probability in mathematics, of how these particular models actually work, both at the micro scale, or like thinking about weather, for example, but then at the larger macro scale. There's a lot that goes on in terms of understanding these climate models that we often see. Another thing that's important that people forget about is like textiles. the things that we actually wear, like synthetic clothing, there's a lot of science that goes on in terms of synthetic clothing and how to manufacture this in a better way. One of the jobs I remember as a chemical engineer, there was a consulting company that came in and was trying to get us to go work there at this. It came into the classroom, and they were talking about these complicated problems in McDonald's of how to manufacture French fries, for example. And you often need a good understanding of mathematics to see how this actually works. Or, maybe it's anthropology of looking at how people interact in the store. Um, Another one that's really, really important that we forget about, and I mean, it's just really complicated, right? Blockchain technology, for example, and cryptocurrency, the sort of currency markets, all of this stuff, there is a need for people to understand the analytical skills of how to actually look at the world. And when you start getting into all these different fields, you realize that there is a tremendous amount of work to be done because we just simply don't know. Not only that, it is really, really hard to study the world. There is a lot of really complicated problems that happen that you're just not well aware of until you actually study those particular things. And so what ends up happening often, and this is where I'm going to branch off and not talk about examples per se, but this is why it's actually really important to understand these things, is that knowing how to study the world, knowing that, first of all, studying the world is really, really important, but then knowing how to study the world and knowing what we know right now, it is extremely complicated. And no amount of mathematical models that we have, no amount of, chat GPT and all of that stuff is going to make that easy. It's going to make it easier, but we still need a lot of people doing things what's called knowledge translation, where they're thinking about how do we communicate this to a broader audience so that other people understand, and it's not just computers that are looking it up, right? So we need human beings to go around and actually be advocates of many of these particular ideas, and you need to know what these particular ideas are. And you don't know what the complicated things are until you actually go into those particular fields and start studying them. You realize, man, nature and human beings and how we actually operate is very complicated. We know a lot, but there is a tremendous amount that we don't know. And that will always probably be. It's a fundamental problem that we have. There's always uncertainty. We don't know the world. And so there's always room for expansion of new ideas. I've been in this game for a long time, the whole research game for like 20 years. And I feel like I'm just beginning, right? Like I'm just understanding some things, and yet there's a whole new world that's opening that I just couldn't imagine would be opening. All right, so hopefully this helps you out. Make sure you never think of yourself as stuck, right? I want you to think about that there's always room for opportunities. It is not just in academia where you can do things, and I want you to explore, look at the world, see the world is just a playground of many things that are interesting. All right, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.